Cuba is changing in a lot of ways, but how is this affecting the Cuban culture is a question not answered. That's why we met the poet, filmmaker, and artist Victor Casaus, director of the Pablo de la Torriente Brau Center. Victor, thank you so much for having us here. It's so great to visit this center, which is very important in the promotion of culture. But I want to know a little bit more. What's this center all about? What do you do here?
Our main line of work here has to do with historical memory, and it is present in everything we do. From its foundation 18 years ago, our center has created different spaces for cultural promotion, especially with young people and several artists, and in areas so diverse as digital art. Our center was the first in Cuba to explore digital art. We had 11 showrooms. We also have a space for the new song movement called Guitar Only. We have a publishing house and digital newsletters focused on historical memory. And we have graphical design projects which have helped revitalize the Cuban poster, which was very important in the 1960s and 70s. All these activities might seem disconnected among themselves, but all of them are tied by a conducting thread that has to do with rescuing historical memory and its production for the future.
And how important is, Victor, that you're settled here in the old Havana? This is a very symbolic place. How does it help with your work?
Yes, it is a symbolic place. There is a beautiful gesture behind our being here. In addition to historical memory as a conducting thread in the activity of our center, there is another human category which is very important, and it is friendship. And the fact that our center is located here is due to that feeling of friendship. So when our center was founded around 1996 as an independent institution within the Artists and Writers Guild, we didn't have a location. So we had a first year of activities thanks to institutions such as Casa de las Américas, the venue of the Artists and Writers Guild, or the University of Havana, in spaces that close and longtime friends would offer us, because they supported what we were starting to do. And being here later is the result of historical memory because of our friend Eusebio Leal, the historian of Havana.
The keeper of the memories of Havana.
Exactly. He's the man who has built this marvel. And we often say he has the great virtue of looking at the ruins of some building and imagining what they are going to be like in the future. Together with his team, he is the key player in making this part of the city what it is today. And we're happily located here on 63 Muralla Street, thanks to that help from Eusebio Leal.
I want to know a little bit more about the center and to know where you do your cultural activities here. Show me.
Well, our space here is not so large, but it's beautiful. I'll show it to you.
So this is where you have, Victor, your activities, right? Where you invite people and the new musicians have all their audience here, and where you promote the culture created by new artists. That's very interesting. But you said previously when we were upstairs, Victor, that this center, El Centro Pablo de la Torriente Brau, is an independent center. And would this be considered like civil society? Because, you know, in Cuba, there's a perception outside that there is no independence by the intellectual community, and that you all are like manipulated in a way, or you don't have enough independence. I want to know your opinion about this idea, about this prejudice about Cuba, if it's a prejudice.
Sí, sí, nuestro
Yes,
trabajo tiene que
our
ver con
work has to do a lot with the point you mentioned, in the sense that even before the creation of our center, we were all convinced personally and as a group that our society needs that diversity of perspectives. That was always important, and in the last few years to our days, it is something essential. Because a monolithic, uniform, and exclusive perspective has long demonstrated its inefficiency, not only in the field of culture, but yes, quite often and dramatically in the field of culture. That's why our work has been specially focused on that independence of opinions and to the need and capability of showing it as part of a debate that is more necessary every day. A debate in which our participation is essential. Without theorizing on that aspect, because we're actually artists and not theorists, there have been a number of concepts and opinions along these years in which we believe, because it has been demonstrated in practical experience. One of them is what we call our political poetics, since we believe that our political activity needs poetry and a look that goes beyond the here and now, or beyond what is insufficient or blunt, or whatever prevents you from fairly looking at reality. And at the same time, poetic creation needs a sense of belonging and participation in reality. Not just to be laudatory or to sing its praises, but to analyze and show it. And together with audiences, draw conclusions from the truths that artists are proposing.
Eso es lo que nosotros hemos hecho en estos años.
That's what we've done along these years, to offer spaces, especially to young artists, to be able to express themselves and with absolute freedom, and to promote the exchange between the artists and the public that comes to our center through our own publications, to find truths which are by no means absolute ones.
So you think that the engagement between the politics or the context, the current context that the artists live is important? You can separate art from politics, from history, from the current context you're living?
There's an old saying or joke which I often use. You don't wake up being a writer and then in the early afternoon you are a revolutionary militant, and in the late afternoon you are a lover and then a debater at night. No, you are every bit of these in one person. And in that richness of the human being is where I believe we find the highest and best values we have to develop. One cannot regard each of these categories separately as characterizing different persons and think that there are politicians and artists and thinkers. The ideal thing for a society, and this is not easy to achieve, is that every citizen has a bit of each of these categories and the capabilities and the formation to exercise them. And conscious that you do not have the single truth, but that your truth will encounter other ones in the areas of thinking or mass media, which are always important, but which quite often do not fulfill their social function. That way, there will be truths that will be closer to a single truth if it really exists.
You mentioned a very important word, to be a revolutionary. In Spanish would be ser un revolucionario. How would you define that in these times we're living now?
Sí. Hay una
I
definición
read
que
a
habla de
definition
muchos
among the
textos
works of Raúl
de
Roa
Raúl Roa, a quien
and
también
those of Pablo de la
he leído
Torriente
mucho y he conocido mucho
when
junto
they
con
wrote
Pablo, ¿no?
about
Hablando de su
changing
generación que
things in their
trató de cambiar
generations in
las
Cuba
cosas
in
en
the
Cuba en la década del
1930s,
30 del siglo pasado, y
and
él decía
Roa
de sí mismo,
said
yo me
about
convertí en un
himself,
revolucionario
I
el día
became a
que no
revolutionary on the day I
estuve de
disagreed
acuerdo
with the
con el mundo
static
estante,
world.
como él decía, una palabra que él
And
usaba,
I
el mundo
knew,
estante,
and I
y que
knew I
yo
had to be
tenía que
part of
participar en esa
transformations.
transformación. Yo creo que ese es
That's the
el
point
punto
in
de que
which
en cualquier
anywhere in the
lugar del
world, and not
planeta, en
only in
cualquier
Cuba,
lugar
a
del mundo,
person
no en
can
Cuba
be
solamente,
defined as
puede
a
definir
revolutionary,
a una persona en el
changing
sentido
things around
de ser o
us
no
to make them better.
revolucionario.
And that
Cambiar
way
las
of
cosas que están
bettering things
alrededor
may
de uno
influence
para
values
mejorarlas,
which are
y que esa
essential for a
mejoría o
revolutionary
esa
action.
manera de mejorarlas influya
So this
en valores
action
que
should be
son
in favor of
esenciales para
social
pensar en
justice and
sociedad
equality,
revolucionaria. A mi modo de
not
ver,
precisely
esté a favor de la
egalitarianism,
justicia social, que esté a
but
favor
equality
de la
among
igualdad, no
people,
el
among
igualitarismo, la igualdad
genders,
entre las
among ways of
personas, la
seeing the
igualdad entre los
world,
géneros, la igualdad entre las
and
maneras
for
de
a
pensar el mundo.
transformation action to be
Y que
revolutionary,
esa acción
it has to
transformadora para mí,
have
para que
praxis.
sea revolucionaria, tiene que tener también una
If
práctica.
ideas are just part of
Que
wishful
queden
thinking,
solamente
their
en los deseos de
contribution
alguien
will
y
not
realmente
be
aporten
what
o no
humanity
a lo que la
needs.
gente y la humanidad necesitan.
You are a writer, a poet, you are a movie maker, you've made documentaries, and you've been doing a very interesting job here in this center for the promotion of culture, for showing the world new musicians born here in our current context in Cuba. And Victor, I truly wonder, why have you devoted yourself to this?
Nosotros queríamos hacer un
We wanted
espacio
to create a
de
space
Roa
for the
Trova
new song
porque eso es
movement,
parte
which
de
is part of my
mis
generational
orígenes, al
roots,
lado de
together
mi
with Silvio
generación, Silvio, Noel, de
Rodriguez, Pablo
Pablo, de Vicente,
Milanés, Noel
y la
Nicola,
posibilidad de
Vicente
hacerlo fue
Feliu.
cuando existió
And
este
the
patio, lo
possibility
cual
came with this
pudimos
patio.
hacerlo.
We couldn't do
Y
it
esa
before.
aparición sucesiva
And
de
the gradual
espacios
appearance of
creo
spaces
que
has
me hizo
made me
pensar,
think
y es lo que pienso
that
hoy también,
this
que eso es
something
parte
is
de
part
eso
of my
que,
work.
para llamarlo con palabras a lo mejor mayores,
So it should be
logro. Es decir, entender esto
understood
como
as
parte
my
de mi
poetry
poesía o de mi
or
narrativa o de mi
narrative as
testimonio,
long
en la
as
medida en
we
que
allowed others to
propiciamos
do
que
the
otros
same
hagan poesía, testimonios,
and to express
síntesis,
themselves
tengan
and
un
have a
lugar en donde
place
decir lo que
where they
piensan,
can say
cómo
what's on their minds.
trasladar, cómo trasvasar
It's like transferring
esos
those needs
deseos y
one
esas
has so
necesidades de
that
uno
others can
para que otra
exercise
gente
and enjoy them.
las ejerzan y las disfruten.
There's a lot of
Hay mucho de
generosity in that,
generosidad en eso
and I don't
y no
say
lo
this
digo
because
por
of
mí,
me, but because of our
o por mí
center.
solamente por lo menos, sino por
So
el
in the
centro. Yo
future,
creo
when our
que eso es
center will be
algo que si
remembered,
algún día se
I want
perdiera
it
las
to
cosas
be
del centro,
not
dentro de
because
algún
of
tiempo,
what Victor
a mí me
Casaus
gustaría
did,
que se
but because the
reconociera,
things
no la de
that all
Víctor
of
Casado,
us
sino la
did
de todo el
here.
mundo que está aquí.
I listened yesterday a phrase said by Silvio Rodriguez in a documentary aired by Telesur, in which he said, I knew when I was 20 years old that my country was much more important than myself. So in Spanish would be, yo sabía a mis 20 años que mi país era mucho más importante que yo. And he was, in that moment, already a great artist, singer, musician. And I wonder now, and that's an idea of knowing what's greater than us, what's more important than ourselves. What do you think is the role that the intellectual community has now in this current Cuba that we're living, facing so many changes, so many different paths that we're creating now? What's the role of the intellectual community?
Para mí podría ser un verbo.
To me, that is summarized by one verb we practice here every day, and it is to participate. So everything we do here is summarized by the verb participate.
para mí sería participar. Y participar la comunidad intelectual,
And the
como tú
participation of
dices,
the intellectual
ante
community in the
las
things
cosas
that
que
we
ya
are already
están
happening
sucediendo y sobre todo sobre las
and
que van
those
a
about to
suceder,
happen
a mí me parece
is, in
muy
my opinion,
importante. Hace un
very
momento tú
important.
pasaste por el
A
tema
while ago, you were
de
mentioning the political
la
vision
visión
about
política
things
de las cosas o de la
and
politización.
being apolitical.
Y yo creo que una de las
And I
maneras
think that one of the most complete
completas o
and
más
necessary
eficaces de
ways
esa
of that
participación tendría que
participation
ser
would be
tener
having a
una
political
participación
and
política
cultural
real
participation in the face of
ante los hechos.
reality.
Es lo que nosotros
It's what we
modestamente
call,
llamamos,
from our humble point of
desde mi punto
view,
de vista, la
the
poética
political
política, es la
poetics.
fusión de esas dos
That
cosas.
is the
Me parece
fusion
muy
of
importante
those
porque
two
estos
things.
tiempos
It's
que
important
vienen
because in the
también
times ahead,
juegan
there
contra
might be better economic
condiciones
situations to the
económicas más
ones we've
favorables
had.
de las que hemos tenido.
It's a challenge for the intellectual community.
Exactamente. Para la
Exactly.
gente en
For
general y
people
para
in
los
general and for the
intelectuales
intellectual
es una
community,
expresión
that is a thinking expression.
interesante de esa
Not the only one, but a thinking expression of that more general community, which is the people.
que es el pueblo, ¿no? Y no se puede
And one
estar
cannot be a passive bystander,
desarmado,
just
mirando
looking at things.
solamente, sino creo que la
But we
responsabilidad
have the responsibility of participating through critical analysis,
a través de la
saying what one
a
thinks.
través de decir lo que se piensa. Pablo tiene una
Pablo de la Torriente wrote a phrase in his exile letters from New York that we have often quoted and adopted as a slogan of our center. He said that on the one hand, he was neither interested at all in the perfect man, nor did he believe in it, that the only way you see a perfect man is in an American movie. A truth he wrote in 1936. On the other hand, he said that his letters were the political records of his thinking and that he wouldn't mind at all being wrong about politics because the one who is never wrong is the one who does not participate or does not struggle. That sense of committed, courageous, and risky participation that Paulo and others of his generation had is the one we want to have and the one we have tried to have here. And we believe it's the most useful and necessary at this moment, not the non-critical vision that does not allow examining problems or a current tendency that is gaining strength in the country, and which implies some kind of disengagement from these themes, which are called political, when in fact they are more than political. And this has to do with each and everyone's commitment to what is to come. What is to come is not a project on things that will get better, but it is considering what will happen with everything that was attempted and done in the last 50 years. And there are some tendencies which will continue to future days to harshly evaluate things that were done as something worthless. As young people today say, it worked, it didn't work. So from that lot, we have to pick and choose what we need to save and to discard the mistakes we made. We cannot repeat the same mistakes we already made, and I include myself even when I was not part of those mistakes. And we cannot believe that everything to come will be good or perfect.
Are we prepared for this challenge that we're facing?
Yo creo que podemos.
I think we can be prepared to meet the challenges. It's a question to myself too, not precisely an answer. And in the answer to that question, there will be different ways to look at things. If I were an old school person, I could say, yes, we are prepared for everything.
Estamos preparados para todos. Uno tiene la impresión de que
One
hay
has the
sectores
impression
que ya
that there
están
are some sectors already thinking and working for whatever is to come.
para lo que viene y lo que viene para
For some people, as they say outside Cuba, it's a post-Castro period, and we can give it another name here. And there are other sectors in power which are working towards securing a personal salvation before those changes. As it has happened in other countries where socialism was dismantled in different ways. I believe that here it is everybody's responsibility to prevent that from happening that way, and that such a collapse wouldn't mean a collapse of values that have made us what we are. Poor, but not miserable people, but rich people in a different sense, in the sense of an extraordinary human capital and in the sense of a richness of values that are extraordinary, even if that sounds like a national boast.
de que también es extraordinario.
That will be a source of energy to continue, but only if it follows this perspective. Not if this follows a pleasing perspective or the opportunistic one of finding the best place to be in a post-Castro period.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much.
Gracias a ti.
It's been a pleasure, Victor.